Hello and welcome to Wildwestfaces. Today's story takes place in Oklahoma in 1909. A retired deputy marshal by the name of Gus Bobbitt was causing some problems for two men by the name of Jesse West and Joe Allen. You see, these two men were getting the local Indians liquored up and then buying their land at ridiculously cheap prices. And Gus Bobbitt knew what was going on. Well, these two men didn't like the fact that Gus was meddling in their affairs, so they hired a killer to kill him. This was done, but not without severe consequences. The town was up in arms, and a mob of 150 to 200 men saw to it that these men all met their justice in an old livery stable. We hope you'll enjoy this story here on Wild West Faces. Gus Bobbit was retired as a deputy marshal, but he was causing trouble for two unscrupulous characters by the names of Jesse West and Joe Allen, who were supplying liquor to the Indians, getting them drunk, and then buying their land for ridiculously cheap prices. When the ex-marshal Bobbitt tried to get their wicked practices stopped, West and Allen hired gunman Jim Killer Miller to murder him. After Miller had been paid a fee of $1,700, he shot Bobbitt when the ex-lawman was riding home. Bobbitt survived just long enough to make his way home and identify his killer to his wife. Miller was then arrested in Texas by a Texas Ranger and extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial alongside Jesse West, Joe Allen, and Barry Burrell, who had acted as a middleman in the killing. The Daily Ardmore, Ardmore, Oklahoma, Monday, April 19th, 1909. At 3 o'clock, 200 determined men overpowered jail guards, took doomed men from cells and strung them to rafters in old stable. Work done thoroughly, and in order little resistance is made. Ada, Oklahoma, April 19th. With the lynching this morning about 3 o'clock at this place of Jim Miller, Jesse West, Joe Allen, and D.B. Burrell, charged with the murder of Gus Bobbitt, ended what was for years one of the bloodiest band of murderers in the state of Oklahoma, and an organization of professional assassins that for a record of blood crimes probably has no equal in the annals of criminal history in the entire Southwest. The citizens of Ada were horrified, but not in the least surprised this morning on arising to find in an old abandoned delivery barn back of the jail the cold and dangling bodies of the four men hanging from the rafters. When the details of the quadruple lynching became known, the entire town was in a furor of excitement, and for a time it was believed that violence to other persons would be done, so frenzied had the crowd become. However, the work of the lynchers had been so thorough and so systematic, and so little fuss had been made, that there was little left to do but to notify the relatives of the victims to come and get the bodies. At 3 o'clock this morning, the guards at the jail, Deputy Sheriffs Walter Goyne and Bud Nestor, were surprised and overpowered by the advance agents of the mob, numbering between 150 and 200 determined men. Nestor attempted to make resistance, but he was at once made to understand that no interference would be brooked and was beaten over the head with the butt end of a revolver. The keys to the cells were secured, and the four men, Miller, West, Allen, and Burrell, were taken out of the jail and to an old abandoned delivery stable in the rear, where they were strung up, one at a time, to the rafters of the building. Their hands were tightly bound behind them with baling wire, and the first man to swing was Miller, and the others were hauled up in regular order. West was the only one of the quartet to offer any resistance, and he put up a desperate fight when he learned what the mob was after. He was beaten into submission after a fierce struggle which lasted only a short time, and later when his body was cut down, he was badly cut and very bloody from the beating. 3 others charged with murder were in jail at the same time: young Peeler, nephew of Miller, and 2 men charged with the killing of town marshal Zeke Putman at Allen. They were not molested. While the mob was carrying out its bloody work, 2 of their number were left at the jail to guard the officers and to prevent them from giving an alarm until the lynchers had completed their work. The deputies under guard were warned not to make an outcry or to stick their heads out of the window for 30 minutes, or they would be instantly shot. Shortly before the mob appeared at the jail, other members visited the electric light plant and forced the employees on duty to cut all wires controlling streetlight service in the city so that their work might be done without fear of detection or interruption. Some few of the members of the mob were masked, while the others appeared with nothing to conceal their identity. It's believed by some that the mob was organized by friends and neighbors of Bobbitt, while others are of the opinion that many residents of Ada had a hand in it. Certain it is, however, that no member of the crowd has been apprehended, and apparently no efforts have been made to establish any identities. Sheriff Tom Smith of Pontotoc County is in Rough today, and nothing toward the apprehension of members of the mob has yet been done. The justice's inquest on the bodies of the hanged men will be held today.
The latest Kansas town to fall into line with the prevalent bank robberies is Sylvan Grove, a small town in this county, about 15 miles west of Lincoln. About 8 o'clock last Monday afternoon, 3 men, well armed and mounted on fine horses, rode into Sylvan Grove. One of them at once rode up to a stone hitching post in the rear of the Sylvan State Bank and directly in front of A. Karlowski's blacksmith shop. He dismounted and hitched his horse to the post, and then leisurely walked into the bank. In the meantime, his companions had halted in the middle of the street in front of the bank and accosted 2 or 3 chance passers-by with inquiries as to the best road to Lincoln, thus preventing attention being attracted to anything that might happen in the bank. The desperado who had entered the bank at once walked up to the cashier's window and requested small change for a silver dollar. Will Schermerhorn, assistant cashier, was in charge of the bank, the cashier, John Colleen, being absent in Dickinson County. Mr. Schermerhorn complied with his request and counted out 10 silver dimes. Several remarks were made about the scarcity of small change, and then Mr. Schermerhorn remarked that he could let him have a $50 in exchange for another dollar. The desperado said all right, and the second change was passed over to him. He, however, failed to give up the second dollar until Mr. Schermerhorn drew his attention to the supposed oversight. The man then made several commonplace remarks about the weather and acted as if he was about to leave the bank. This, however, was evidently only a ruse to see how matters were progressing in the street. He then, while standing by the front window, with his back to the cashier, threw open his coat and drew a revolver, and wheeling suddenly presented it at the cashier's head with the exclamation, "Don't holler, or God damn you, I'll blow your brains out." He then walked around the counter and producing a canvas bag and held it out to the cashier and ordered him to open it and shove the money in. Mr. Schermerhorn refused to do so, and after a little parleying, the fellow suddenly struck him on the forehead with the revolver. Although not hurt very much, Mr. Schermerhorn had the good sense to at once drop to the floor. A very unfortunate thing for the robber, as his body covered from view a Sharp's rifle, which lay on the floor. The robber then hurriedly helped himself to $1,700, overlooking a $2,000 package which lay further back in the safe. After the money was put in the sack, the robber inquired if the back door was unlocked, and upon ascertaining that it was not, he compelled Mr. Schermerhorn at the point of the revolver to unlock it for him, and then, after threatening to shoot him full of holes if he raised any alarm for 10 minutes, left the bank and walked towards his horse. The other 2 robbers were now also making their way slowly to the same place, covering his retreat. In the meantime, quick-witted, courageous young Schermerhorn had picked up the Sharp's rifle, run out of the front door, stepped around the corner of the building, and taking aim at the desperado, just as he flung the sack on the saddle of the horse, fired the only load in the rifle. A steady hand and a brave heart, however, made up for the lack of ammunition, and one more desperado was ushered into eternity. The ball entered the man's body just back of the right arm and came out at the left side of the breast near the nipple, passing through the heart, killing him instantly, the hitching post being completely bespattered with blood. The two other robbers now commenced firing rapidly at Schermerhorn, and also made frantic efforts to get possession of the sack of money and make the dead robber's horse jerk loose. But Schermerhorn kept dodging around the corner of the building, snapping his empty rifle at them. Several of the robbers' shots struck the building. Brumbaugh, one of the proprietors of Brumbaugh and Bowen's livery stable, had heard the firing, and grabbing a revolver that had been kept in the stable for emergencies, now commenced firing at them. This attracted their attention and compelled them to give up all hopes of securing the dead robber's haul, and putting spurs to the horses, they galloped off in a northwesterly direction. Before leaving, however, they fired several shots at the body of their fallen companion, undoubtedly upon the principle that dead men tell no tales. Schermerhorn at once secured the bank's money, and the first bank robbery in Lincoln County was a failure. The dead robber was at once taken into an adjoining vacant building and searched for evidence as to his identity. 2 medical prescriptions for wound liniment, dated October 10, 1894, given by Dr. Grattan of Morgansville, Kansas, were found. Also a slip of paper having the following address written upon it: J.S. McKee, Hickory Street, St. Joseph, Missouri. 2 flasks of whiskey with St. Joseph labels on the bottles, 2 large Colt's revolvers, a cartridge belt which covered the entire body, containing nearly 300 cartridges, bandages, and liniment, 2 large plugs of horseshoe, tobacco, $1.25 in gold, and several dollars in silver. He was fairly well dressed. Everything about the fellow showed the desperado. The bandages and liniments indicate that he fully realized that he carried his life in his hands. He was 5 feet 8 inches in height and weighed about 145 pounds, wore a large, heavy red mustache with about a week's growth of beard on his face. In the absence of the coroner Phillips, justice of the peace, at once impaneled a jury, and the usual verdict in such cases was at once returned. The store at Tipton, a small place about 25 miles northwest of Sylvan Grove, was robbed the night before and $200 taken, presumably the work of the same band.